Hello Star Wars fans, and welcome to episode 34 of Journey into Legends. Today I'm going to be reading and reviewing the short story collection Tales from Jabba's Palace. Tales from Jabba's Palace is a collection of short stories written by various authors centering on the various creatures and characters seen in Jabba's palace during Return of the Jedi. I really enjoyed Tales from the Mos Eisley Cantina, so I'm excited to continue reading some short stories. Without further ado, let's read and review. Alright, so our first story is called A Boy and His Monster, The Rancor Keeper's Tale, by Kevin J. Anderson, and of course it involves around the Rancor Keeper, Malakili. Now I enjoyed this one quite a bit. I think the relationship between Malakili and the Rancor was done really well, and is definitely the highlight of this story for me. And like Greedo's story from the Mos Eisley book, this one recontextualizes the Rancor's death scene, and made me feel bad for it and the Keeper. Other than that, there's nothing else noteworthy to talk about, but again, I enjoyed this story and thought it was a fun start to this book. Alright, the second story we have is called Taster's Choice, The Tale of Jabba's Chef by Barbara Hambly, and this one follows Jabba's chef, Porcellus. I wasn't a huge fan of this one. Once again, Barbara Hambly's writing is just very dull and boring to read, and the story of this one just wasn't very entertaining. Porcellus as a character is uninteresting to me, and this story had some really weird and random elements, like how Jabba accuses Porcellus of cooking food that causes bad luck, or how Porcellus just randomly falls in love with Leia when she becomes a slave. The story wasn't bad by any means, it just didn't offer much in the way of enjoyment. Alright, so the third story that we have here is called That's Entertainment, The Tale of Salacious Crumb by Esther P. Freisner, and it follows the iconic Salacious Crumb, the monkey lizard. And I really enjoyed this one. Although there was no action and it never ended up tying into the scenes from Return of the Jedi, I found the interactions between Salacious Crumb and the Professor Melvosh Blore to be really entertaining. I was actually quite surprised at how intelligent Salacious Crumb was portrayed in this story. I always thought he was non-sentient, but he's actually got some semblance of intelligence, which was an unexpected surprise. I also really liked how it's established that if Crumb doesn't make Jabba laugh at least once a day, Jabba will eat him, which makes him a sort of sympathetic character, which again, was unexpected. Overall, despite how thin the plot was, this one was quite fun. Alright, the next story is called A Time to Mourn, A Time to Dance, Oola's Tale by Kathy Tyers, and this one follows the Twi'lek dancer Oola from when she's taken by Bib Fortuna to her inevitable death in Return of the Jedi. Overall, this one was decent. Once again, Kathy Tyers' writing is very dull to me, which made this story less entertaining to read than it could have been. One thing I really liked about this story is how it portrayed Luke. Other than that, this story was nothing special. Alright, so our fifth story is called Let Us Pray, The Whiphid's Tale by Marina Fitch and Mark Budds, and this one follows a Whiphid named Jaquil, who is secretly working for Jabba's rival, Lady Valerian, and this story is basically all about Jaquil trying to cover his tracks after attempting to poison Jabba. I wasn't the biggest fan of this story, unfortunately. The story was pretty uneventful, and I thought the writing was rather dull. The biggest redeeming quality for this one was that it ties into the larger story of this entire book, which deals with a mysterious string of murders. But other than that, this story wasn't very special, and is probably my least favorite thus far. Alright, the next story we have is called Sleight of Hand, The Tale of Mara Jade by Timothy Zahn, and this one of course follows Mara Jade as she disguises herself as one of Jabba's dancers so she can kill Luke. Now this is something that we knew happened from Heir to the Empire, but seeing it play out in this story was really cool, and of course, like always, Timothy Zahn's writing just pulled me in right away and never let go. Overall, this one was a lot of fun, and is definitely my favorite thus far. Alright, our seventh story is called And Then There Were Some, The Gamorrean Guard's Tale by William F. Wu, and it follows a Gamorrean guard named Gartog as he investigates a string of murders in Jabba's palace. I wasn't expecting to like this story, but it completely caught me off guard, and I really liked it. I thought Gartog was a really funny character, and I liked the way the Gamorrean guards were portrayed. though I think the other guards were portrayed a bit too intelligent for Gamorreans. My favorite part of this story was how it connected to the previous stories from this book, including the multiple bodies that turn up in the chef's tale, the guy that the Rancor keeper killed in his tale, the monk from the Whiphid's tale, etc. This whole conspiracy plot is starting to come together. Overall, this story came out of nowhere, and I thought it was super fun, definitely one of my favorites thus far. Alright, so the next story we have is called Old Friends, Ephant Tale by Kenneth C. Flint, and this one follows the Shevan alien Ephant, and unfortunately, I didn't enjoy this one very much. There were some aspects I liked, such as Luke's portrayal and the way Ephant and Jabba the Hutt's friendship is portrayed, but other than that, this story didn't offer much in the way of plot. Other than Ephant trying to warn Jabba about the numerous assassination plots that he's in danger of, this story was pretty uneventful and thematically unfocused. So overall, despite some decent setup, because of the lack of effective payoff, this story left a lot to be desired. Alright, so the ninth story we have is called Goatgrass, The Tale of Ree-Yees by Deborah Wheeler, and it follows the grand alien Ree-Yees as he schemes to assassinate Jabba. This one was pretty good. I liked the story that was being told here, and I liked how it tied into some of the other stories, such as Ephant and the Chefs. And I liked how this story ended with Jabba's sail barge exploding from Ree-Yees' perspective. Other than those things, this story wasn't too interesting, and unfortunately, it's not one of my favorites thus far. Alright, so the next story we have is called And the Band Played On, The Band's Tale by John Gregory Betancourt, and it follows the Max Rebo Band, and I really enjoyed this one. Max Rebo and his bandmates are pretty interesting characters, and I always enjoy exploring the simpler things in Star Wars, like a band. Overall, there's not much to talk about, just that this was one of the better stories thus far, and I really enjoyed it. Alright, so the 11th story we have is called Of the Day's Annoyances, Bib Fortuna's Tale by M. Shane Bell, and I really enjoyed this one. Personally, I've always thought that Bib Fortuna was an interesting character, and that remains true here. Basically, this story follows Fortuna as he's preparing to betray Jabba, which is something we know is true from the Jabba the Hutt comics. Something I really liked about this story was how it utilized the Biomar monks. I've always really been interested and creeped out by these monks, and I enjoyed their inclusion here. And probably my favorite aspect of this story was that it ended with Bib Fortuna surviving the sail barge explosion, only to later get enlightened, which is code for getting your brain put into a spider jar. Overall, I really enjoyed this one, and it's definitely one of my favorites thus far. Alright, our next story is called The Great God Quay, The Tale of Barada and the Weequays by George Alec Effinger, and it focuses on the Klatooinian named Barada as well as a group of Weequays. I actually really enjoyed the story. It was short and sweet, and actually kind of funny as the Weequays investigate a string of murders in the palace using what is essentially a magic 8-ball. Overall, while it wasn't one of my absolute favorites, it was a lot more entertaining than I was expecting. Alright, the 13th story is called A Bad Feeling, The Tale of EV-99 by Judith and Garfield Reeves Stevens, and it focuses on the torture droid EV-99. I was actually looking forward to this story since the character of EV-99 has always intrigued me, but unfortunately this one was disappointing. I enjoyed how sadistic EV-99 was portrayed here, but this story was just way too verbose and drawn out, and I thought the part of the story that took place on Cloud City felt random and unnecessary. Overall, this wasn't a bad story, but it wasn't as good as I was expecting it to be. Alright, our next story is called A Free Quarren in the Palace, Tessek's Tale by Dave Wolverton, and it focuses on the Quarren character in Jabba's palace named Tessek. I actually really enjoyed this one. Tessek is an interesting character in that he's not actually an evil guy like most of the people in Jabba's entourage. He actually spends this whole story plotting Jabba's assassination, and in the end, escapes when the sail barge explodes. The only thing I didn't like about this story was that it ended with Tessek being enlightened by the Biomar monks like how Bib Fortuna's story ended. And while it worked in Bib's story, I think it kind of came out of nowhere in this one and felt random. Overall, a fun story, but that ending felt unearned. Alright, so the 15th story is called Tongue-Tied Bubo's Tale by Daryl F. Mallet, and it follows the frog dog Bubo from Jabba's palace. Unfortunately, this one is probably my least favorite story thus far. Although it's extremely short, there's absolutely no substance whatsoever. All we learn is that Bubo is intelligent, that he hates Ree-Yees, and that after Jabba's death, like Fortuna and Tessek, his brain is placed into a jar to become an enlightened brain spider. This story isn't bad, it's just extremely uneventful. Alright, our 16th story is called Out of the Closet, The Assassin's Tale by Jennifer Roberson, and it continues the story of the Anzat Danik Jericho from Tales from the Mos Eisley Cantina. And unfortunately, this story suffers from the exact same problems as his story from that book. The writing is extremely verbose, and the story is extremely uneventful. The one aspect of this story that I liked was that Danik Jericho was revealed as the one behind all the murders in the palace, which means that Gartog was actually right in his hypothesis, which is just hilarious. But other than that, this story was yet another boring Jennifer Roberson story, and one of my least favorites so far. Alright, so our 17th story is called Shaara and the Sarlacc, the Skiff Guard's Tale by Daniel Danahy Oakes, and it follows a Skiff Guard as he recounts a story about his sister to Boba Fett. Basically, this story involves his sister Shaara being chased into the Dune Sea by a squad of stormtroopers before they all stumble into the Great Pit of Carkoon, and the story ends with the Sarlacc eating the troopers but saving Shaara. Overall, the story was pretty uneventful, and I don't know what to make of the Sarlacc not only letting someone go, but actively saving them. Luckily, I found the story enjoyable simply because I found the writing quite engaging. Alright, our second to last story is called A Barve Like That, The Tale of Boba Fett by J.D. Montgomery, and it follows Boba Fett during his stay in and eventual escape from the Sarlacc pit. This one was fantastic. Not only did the author do a great job of conveying just how miserable and hopeless being in the Sarlacc feels, I absolutely loved the extra twist he added of Boba Fett being telepathically linked to the Sarlacc's other victims. I just think that's so weird and clever, and it enhanced the story and my enjoyment of it. As a huge Boba Fett fan, this story was fantastic and delivered on every level, and is easily my favorite story from this book so far. Alright, so our final story is called Skin Deep, The Fat Dancer's Tale by A.C. Crispin, and it follows the fat dancer Yarna Dal Gargan and the hunter Dolan after the events of Return of the Jedi. I wasn't expecting much from this story, but I actually really enjoyed it. It's very light on action, but I actually fell in love with the characters of Yarna and Dolan, which is genuinely surprising since they've always been some of the less interesting characters in Jabba's palace. Whether it's the characters themselves or A.C. Crispin's engaging writing, I don't know, but this story was simply entertaining from beginning to end and ended up actually being one of my favorites from the entire book. And finally, we have Epilogue, Whatever Became Of, which simply recaps what happened to the various characters from the book later on in life. Nothing really worth talking about here, but it was a cool inclusion anyway. Overall, I enjoyed this book quite a bit. I think Tales from the Mos Eisley Cantina was a much more entertaining book, mostly because it offers more variety in its collection of stories. Again, I enjoy this book a fair bit, but unfortunately a lot of the stories are forgettable and uneventful, and I think the overarching story is a bit lacking, so I'm going to give it a 76%. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and stay tuned for my next video where I'll be reading and reviewing the Junior Jedi Knights series by Nancy Richardson and Rebecca Moesta. See ya.